Alexandria, around 250 years before Christ. A Jewish scholar sits down with a Hebrew scroll and a sheet of papyrus. His job is to turn Genesis into Greek, because the Jews of this city speak Greek now, and their own scriptures have started to go quiet on them. Their children can't read them. We don't know his name, we never will. He works his way into the third chapter, the garden, the serpent, the question, and he reaches a single sentence that God speaks to the snake. He writes it out in Greek, and in the middle of it, he makes a mistake. Not a smudge, not a slip of the reed. He writes a word that is grammatically wrong in his own language. And here's what should stop you. He doesn't make that mistake anywhere else, not in the whole book. He handles this exact piece of grammar correctly over and over and over, right the way across Genesis. Everywhere but here. 22 centuries later, a scholar counted every single chance that man had to get it wrong. That number is the reason this video exists. But there's something else. In that same sentence, in the same breath, he did one more strange thing. A second choice almost nobody notices. And that second choice is how we know the first one wasn't an accident. You own that sentence, by the way. It's sitting in your house right now. Open any English Bible to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. God is speaking to the serpent, and it reads something like this. And I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. He, that's the word. 2 letters in English, and it's carrying more structural weight than anything else on the page, because it decides what kind of book you're holding. If that word points at one person, the Bible's very first promise is aimed at an individual. And everything downstream of it, Abraham, David, the prophets, the whole architecture, is a story narrowing towards someone. If it points at a group, at all the woman's descendants together, then this sentence is something else entirely. A line about the long human struggle against evil. Beautiful, serious, but not a promise about a person. Same verse, same ink, one pronoun, 2 completely different Bibles. Now, it would be easy to treat this like a puzzle, a crossword in a dead language. It isn't. Look at what the serpent actually does in that chapter. It doesn't attack, it doesn't threaten, it has no weapon at all. It asks a question. Did God really say? That's it. That's the oldest move in the book. Not force, not violence, just the suggestion, quiet and reasonable and almost friendly, that God is holding something back from you. That the promise is real, technically, but not for you. That everyone else got the good version and you got the fine print. If you've ever felt that, hear this clearly. You're not being faithless. You're standing exactly where the story starts. That suspicion is the first thing that ever went wrong in the world, and it went wrong in the 2 people who had the least reason on earth to feel it. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 is the sentence God speaks in answer to that question, which is why the pronoun isn't an academic matter. It's the difference between God answering a doubt with a policy and God answering it with a person. The reading of this verse as pointing to a single individual is not a Christian invention read backward into the text. It's the oldest interpretation of the verse we have on record. And the evidence isn't a sermon or a tradition. It's a grammatical error made 2.5 centuries before Christianity existed by a man with no possible stake in the outcome. And the other half of it, right now, at the front, because if I hide it, you should stop trusting me. The Hebrew itself does not settle this. It leaves the question genuinely open, both true at the same time. That's the whole story. So, the word underneath everything is Hebrew, zera. Say it, zera. It means seed, offspring, descendant, fruit. It's the ordinary word you'd use for what a farmer scatters and for what a family produces, which in Hebrew isn't much of a leap. And here's the feature that turns this verse into an argument. Zera is grammatically singular, but it works 2 ways. It can be collective. When God tells Abraham his zera will be like the stars, he doesn't mean one child. He means a nation, millions of people, one word. Or it can be individual. It can narrow all the way down to one specific descendant, one man. And Hebrew uses the same form for both. That's not a translation problem. Nobody's being sloppy. That ambiguity is built into the word itself, doing both jobs with the same letters. English can't do this. English makes you choose between offspring and descendants, and the choice leaks your interpretation onto the page. So when God says the woman zera, the Hebrew is doing something English physically cannot do. It's saying both, and it's not telling you which. Which brings us to the second word, the pronoun. In Hebrew, it's who. Say it. Who. Third person masculine singular. He or it. And here's the part a lot of people skip. Who is masculine. Zera is masculine. So the pronoun agrees with the noun. That's just grammar doing its job. Now watch the trap. Grammatical gender is not natural gender. They're not the same thing, and they're not even close. In French, a table is feminine. Nobody thinks the table is a woman. In German, a young girl is neuter. The grammar isn't making a claim about biology. It's making a claim about paperwork. So when the Hebrew of Genesis 3:15 says he, that he is agreeing with a masculine noun. It is not, on its own, telling you there's a man in the sentence, which means the Hebrew he proves nothing, by itself, on its own terms. I know, the pronoun is everything, and now I'm telling you the Hebrew pronoun settles nothing. Stay with me. That's exactly what makes what happens next so strange. So here's the sentence itself, the Hebrew, straight. And I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. Now, there's a detail in there almost nobody mentions, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The verb. In Hebrew, the head and the heel get the same verb, the identical word, twice. Whatever happens to the serpent's head is the same action that happens to the seed's heel. Scholars call it a difficult verbal root, and the action is mutually expressed. The same blow going both directions. Which means the asymmetry you remember, the crushed head against the bruised heel, the fatal wound against the survivable one, that asymmetry is real. But it isn't carried by the verb, it's carried by the anatomy. A head is not a heel. That's the whole difference. The blow is identical, the target isn't. And the verb's meaning? Genuinely uncertain. The range runs from crush to bruise to strike to lie in wait to something like pant after. Serious people disagree about what that word means. Nobody's hiding it. It's just hard. Hold on to that verb. We're coming back to it, and when we do, it's going to matter more than anything else here. Now, back to Alexandria. Back to our man at the desk. Except now you know everything he knew, so you can watch him work. And the date matters here, so let's be precise about it. Scholars put the Greek translation of the first 5 books at roughly 280 to 250 years before Christ in Alexandria. That's not a guess pulled from a legend. The Greek is dated by its own language, which is early post-classical, and manuscript evidence starts showing up in the following century. This is the Septuagint, the oldest translation of the Hebrew Bible that exists. And the reason it exists is beautifully ordinary. Greek-speaking Jews needed to hear their own scriptures. No prophecy project, no agenda. A community that couldn't understand its own book, and scholars who fixed it. So our translator arrives at zera, and he needs a Greek word for seed. He picks the obvious one, sperma. Say it, sperma. Same idea, seed, offspring. It's the right call. But sperma has a property the Hebrew word doesn't. In Greek, sperma is neuter. And Greek is strict about this in a way Hebrew isn't. If your noun is neuter, your pronoun is neuter. Not a style preference, the rule. He needs to write auto. Say it auto. It means it. He writes autos, autos, masculine, he. The sentence is now wrong. Any Greek speaker would catch the mismatch immediately. It's the kind of error you'd circle in red. And it has sat there, uncorrected, in the oldest translation of the Bible for 2,200 years. Now, is that just a mistake? People make mistakes. Long day, hot room, hard text. Maybe he fumbled it. Fair question. And in 1965, a scholar named R.A. Martin answered it in a way that's very hard to argue with. Martin published a 3-page article in the Journal of Biblical Literature, Volume 84. 3 pages, and in it he did the tedious, unglamorous thing that actually settles arguments. He traced every occurrence of that Hebrew pronoun, who, in the entire book of Genesis. There are 103 chances to break Greek grammar, 103 chances to get sloppy on a hot afternoon. And in every literal rendering, the translator keeps the agreement, every single time. Not once does he violate it. Except here. 1 break. In 103 chances. That's the number. And feel the difference between that and what a preacher does. A preacher says the Greek is interesting. Martin counted. 103 to 1 isn't a hunch, it's a fingerprint. And now the other thing, the second strange choice from the same sentence that I flagged at the start. Remember that difficult Hebrew verb? The one that might mean crush, or bruise, or strike, or lie in wait? Our translator had to render that too. Same sentence, same afternoon. And he didn't reach for a violent word. He chose a neutral verb, a careful one. It means to watch, to guard, to keep an eye on. And he used it in both halves, exactly like the Hebrew used one verb in both halves. So here's the oldest translation of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 in English. He will watch your head and you will watch his heel. Read that again. There's no crushing in it. The single most famous violent image in the Bible's first promise, the crushed serpent's head. The picture in your mind right now, the one in the paintings and the hymns and the sermons. It is not in the oldest translation of the verse at all. He looked at that hard, violent, ambiguous Hebrew verb and backed away from it. He picked something quieter, less certain. Sit with that, because it means this man wasn't careless. He was the opposite. He was so careful that when the Hebrew got hard, he refused to overstate it, which makes the pronoun very, very strange. If you're finding this as interesting as I am, subscribe. This is what every video here does. One word, followed all the way down to where it actually goes. So, 3 things, and they don't fit together yet. A word that means one man or an entire nation, and won't tell you which. A Hebrew pronoun that proves absolutely nothing on its own. And a translator who broke his grammar exactly once in 103 chances. On the same afternoon, he was being so careful he wouldn't even say crush. That's the puzzle. And underneath it, still, is the question the serpent asked. Is the promise real, or is God holding out? And now I have to tell you that most Old Testament scholars think this is all wrong. Not some, most. And they're not fools, and they're not enemies, and they're not people who hate the Bible. They're people who read Hebrew for a living. Klaus Westermann argued that this verse cannot be a first announcement of good news, and his reason is the one we already know. Seed here has to be collective, not one man, a lineage. Gerhard von Rad said the same. No messianic sense. What you've got is a struggle between humanity and evil running through history. Gordon Wenham reads it as the sum total of the woman's descendants, not a savior, her children. And a great many scholars go further and read the verse etiologically, an origin story. Why do people hate snakes? Why is life hard? This is the answer. Or symbolically, humanity's endless fight against evil told as a picture. That is the majority position in critical scholarship. Not the lazy reading people fall into when they haven't studied. That is what studying often produces. And if what I've been telling you is worth anything, it has to survive that, not dodge it. Now, I've been holding something back about Martin, the man with the count, the 103. R.A. Martin, the scholar whose article is the entire backbone of the case I've been building, also argued that the English word he is indefensible as a translation of the Hebrew. Indefensible. That's the strength of it. He said the Hebrew pronoun should be rendered it or they. Read that twice. The man who proved the messianic reading is the oldest reading on record, turned around and said the Hebrew doesn't actually say it. Now, if you're waiting for me to explain that away, I'm not going to. It isn't a contradiction. It's the entire point. Martin was never claiming that the Hebrew says he. He was claiming that a man in Alexandria read it that way. Those are completely different claims. And once you see the difference, the question changes shape underneath you. The question was never what Genesis 3:15 says. The Hebrew won't answer that. It's built not to. The question is what the oldest readers of this verse heard when they read it. And that one, unlike the first, is a question we can actually answer, because they left something behind. Now, to be fair, the fight over the Hebrew isn't finished. There's a real argument on the other side, and it deserves its name spoken. In May of 1997, C. John Collins published a piece in the Tyndale Bulletin, Volume 48, pages 139 to 148. He called it a syntactical note, which is about as unglamorous a title as a man can give his own work. Collins argues that Hebrew has a tell, that when a writer wants zera to mean one specific descendant, it shows up dressed a certain way. Singular verb endings, singular adjectives, singular pronouns clustered around it. When it means a collective, it dresses differently. And Genesis 3:15, he argues, matches the individual pattern. That's a minority position, and Collins knows it. Westerman and Von Rad and Wenham aren't persuaded, and I'm not going to hand you a verdict on an argument between people who read this language better than I ever will. But it means the Hebrew door isn't locked, it's ajar. Serious people are still standing in it. And then there's Latin, and Latin is where this gets almost funny. Because the Latin Bible, the Vulgate, does not say he, it says she. Inimicitius ponum inter te et mulierem, et semen tuum, et semen ilius. Ipsa conteret caput tuum, et tu insidia beris calcaneo eius. In English, I will put enmities between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. She shall crush your head, and you shall lie in wait for her heel. Ipsa, say it ipsa. Feminine, she, not the seed, the woman. She crushes the serpent. And the Latin does something else. Remember the one identical Hebrew verb twice? Remember the one neutral Greek verb twice? Latin uses two different verbs. Conteret, shall crush, for the head. And insidia beris, you shall lie in wait, for the heel. So the famous asymmetry, the crushing against the lurking, the fatal blow against the sneak attack, that asymmetry, in that shape, enters the tradition right here, in Latin, not in Hebrew, not in Greek. And this isn't some fringe manuscript. The 16 Vulgate of 1590 prints ipsa. The three Clementine editions, 1592, 1593, 1598, all print ipsa, she. Whether Jerome himself wrote that, or whether a copyist did somewhere along the line, is genuinely disputed, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Some argue Jerome knew perfectly well the Greek said autos and chose the feminine anyway, maybe following older Latin texts already circulating in the West, maybe following what 4th century rabbis told him about the Hebrew vowels. Others argue the original read ipse, he, or ipsum, it, and ipsa crept in through copying. What's not disputed is what it did. If you've ever seen a statue of a woman standing on a serpent, her heel on its head, you've seen this pronoun. If you've ever seen the miraculous medal, the one from the apparition reported by St. Catherine Labour, that's this pronoun, cast in metal. Western art put a woman's foot on that snake because the Latin Bible put her there. And the Vatican's own modern Latin edition, the Nova Vulgata, now prints ipsum, it. I'm not saying that to score a point. I'm saying it because it's the cleanest evidence I know of that this argument never ended. Somebody was still adjusting that pronoun in living memory. 3 languages, 3 pronouns. He, she. 2,000 years, and the fight was always about the same word. So let's follow the word. Not the theory, the word. Zerah goes to Abraham. Your zera will be a nation. Your zera will be one. Both. The same word, doing both jobs again. Zerah goes to David. A dynasty, a throne, an offspring. And then zerah arrives somewhere very strange. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 10. It sits inside the 4th of what are usually called the servant songs. 4 passages at Isaiah 42, 49, 50, and then 52 verse 13 running through 53 verse 12. They trace an arc, a servant commissioned, rejected, crushed, and then somehow vindicated. And in verse 10, this crushed servant, cut off, finished, dead as far as the text is concerned, sees zera, seed, offspring, afterward. Same word as the garden, on the far side of death. Now, two things here are genuinely unsettled, and they're not small. Who the servant is contested. Jewish interpretation and a lot of critical scholarship read the servant as Israel collectively. Some songs explicitly name the servant Israel. Others read him as an individual prophet. Christian reading from the New Testament onward sees the songs converging on the Messiah. Critical scholarship reaches no consensus. None. And whether that zera in verse 10 means literal children or a metaphorical race is disputed too. One position holds zera always means physical offspring and is never symbolic, which would mean the servant had actual children. The other holds it can mean a royal race or a class of people, pointing to places like 2 Kings 11 and Isaiah chapter 1. I'm not settling either one. Nobody here is qualified to, including me. But here's what's observable. The word that was ambiguous in the garden is still ambiguous here, doing the same impossible thing. Both, at once. Which brings us to the strangest witness in this whole argument, and it's Paul. Because Paul reads that singular hard. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 16, he builds an entire argument on the fact that the promise to Abraham used the singular. One offspring, he insists, not many. He stakes real weight on it. And then, in Romans chapter 16, verse 20, the same man tells an ordinary church in Rome that God will soon crush Satan under their feet. Their feet, plural, a whole congregation, ordinary people, and Paul puts the serpent's head under their heels. So which is it, Paul? One man or a whole church? He doesn't answer. He doesn't appear to feel any tension at all, and that's worth sitting with. Because the whole fight assumes an either-or, individual or collective. Pick one. Westerman picks collective, Collins picks individual, and the New Testament's most aggressive reader of the singular never picked. He used both in two different letters without blinking. Maybe the word was never broken. Maybe we just wanted it to be simpler than it is. And at the very end of the canon, the cast comes back. Revelation chapter 12. A woman, her offspring, a dragon, waiting to devour the child the moment it's born. Revelation 20, the ancient serpent thrown into fire. Revelation 22, verse 3. No longer will there be anything accursed. Whether Revelation is consciously quoting Genesis 3:15 is an interpretive judgment, not a demonstrated fact. I can't prove authorial intent across that kind of distance. What's observable is this. The book ends with the cast it started with. A woman, an offspring, a serpent, and this time the serpent loses. So come back to where we started. Not Alexandria. The garden. The serpent's whole strategy was one question. Did God really say? And every honest person has stood inside that question. Not as a theological position, as a feeling at 2 in the morning when the thing you were promised hasn't come and everyone around you seems to be getting the good version of the story. Now look at what God's answer wasn't. It wasn't a proof. It wasn't an argument. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't explain. He makes a promise. Into the worst moment in the entire story. Before anybody had apologized, before anybody had earned anything, before the two people involved had even come out from behind the trees. The suspicion that the promise isn't for you is the oldest suspicion there is, and the answer to it is older than your doubt. It was spoken first. Here's the picture I can't get out of my head. Fresh snow, nobody around. Somebody walked through it a while ago, and you find their tracks. You'll never meet this person. You can't ask them a single question. They're gone, and the snow is all you get. But you can read them anyway. Because footprints hold things. You can see exactly where they slowed down. Short steps, crowded together, weight uneven, someone being careful. And you can see exactly where they leapt. One long stride, both feet gone from the ground, a person committing to something. You don't need the walker. The walk is the testimony. That's this sentence. That's what our translator left in the snow. He slowed at the verb. Faced with a violent, ambiguous Hebrew word, he shortened his steps. He got careful. He refused to say crush when he wasn't certain the text said crush, and he chose a quiet word that only means watch. And in the same breath, the same line, the same afternoon, the same hand, he leapt at the pronoun. He broke his own grammar. He wrote he, where every rule he'd followed everywhere else in the book said write it. Hesitation and commitment, side by side, preserved for 22 centuries. That's what it means to say the Messianic reading is the oldest one on record. Not that somebody argued for it, not that somebody preached it, that somebody left tracks. And you can still read exactly where he hesitated and exactly where he jumped. We cannot interview him. We can read his walk. And here's what stays with me, if I'm honest. It's the anonymity. We don't know his name. We don't know whether his back hurt or whether anyone ever thanked him for a single day of that work. He wasn't building a legacy. He was doing a job for a community that needed their book back in a language their kids could read. We know exactly one thing about what that man believed, and we know it because he got a word wrong. 2,200 years later, the oldest promise in the Bible still carries his fingerprint. Not his argument, he never made one. Not his name, that's gone. Just a moment where accuracy failed him and conviction showed through the crack. He was trying to be careful, and the place he stopped being careful is the only place we can still see him. So, here's the word. The word a man in Alexandria broke his own grammar for 250 years before anyone had heard of Jesus of Nazareth. The word Jerome's Latin turned into a woman and set a heel on a serpent in 1,000 paintings. The word Westerman said was a nation, and Collins said was a man. The word Isaiah's servant saw on the far side of being cut off. The word Paul put under the feet of an ordinary church in Rome. One word, zera, seed. Still doing both jobs, still refusing to be simple, still ambiguous 22 centuries later on every shelf. And maybe that's not a flaw in the text. Maybe a promise that could only ever mean one man would have been too small. And a promise that could only ever mean everybody would have been too safe. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. One word, followed all the way down, every time. And here's where I'll leave you. Whatever question is sitting on you tonight, whatever version of "did God really say" you're carrying, notice when the answer came. Not after the apology, not after the repair, not after anybody had earned a thing. The promise came first. Spoken into the worst moment in the story, over two people hiding in the trees with fig leaves in their hands. It was spoken before you doubted. And it's still the first thing God ever said about the future.